I still remember that morning. The sky over Seattle was heavy and gray, as if even the clouds knew something was about to break. I sat in the 27th floor conference room, gripping a thick binder nearly 100 pages long, labeled Project Velotrack. Optimization Report. 10 years of work, 10 years of sleepless weekends, and endless revisions. Every line of data in that report was proof of how I helped turn Velocity Dynamics into the leading logistics company on the West Coast. And all I wanted today was something simple, a 10% raise. Michael Trent walked in, crisp white shirt, gray tie, and that confident look of a man the industry liked to call a genius. He didn't even glance at me as he sat down, eyes locked on his tablet. I began my presentation: efficiency gains, cost reductions, and new client retention, all tied to the system I'd built. My voice stayed calm and measured. But when I mentioned the raise, Michael finally looked up, raised an eyebrow, and laughed. His laugh echoed through the glass room, sharp, hollow, and far too loud. He leaned back, shaking his head. "Lauren, you want 10% after 10 years? That's adorable." The word cut deep. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my tone steady. He went on, in this industry, everyone's replaceable. If you think you're worth more, feel free to find someone willing to pay that." The air froze between us. I looked at him, searching for even a trace of decency, but all I saw was pride. I pressed my lips together and nodded. Understood. He smiled, one of those patronizing smiles that men like him wear when they think they're teaching you a life lesson. "Good. You're talented, Lauren, but don't let your emotions make you forget who signs the paycheck." When I left the room, the sound of the glass door closing behind me was like a full stop at the end of a chapter. The open office outside buzzed with noise, keyboards clacking, phones ringing, no one looking up. I walked past the rows of desks, my reflection faintly visible in the glass wall. For years, I'd become part of this machine, believing that if I worked hard enough, the results would speak for themselves. But today, I finally saw it. I was just another cell in Michael's spreadsheet. Back at my desk, a new email popped up in the corner of my screen. Subject line: CEO feature, Velocity's visionary leadership. I opened it and stared at Michael's smiling face in the article, framed by bold text praising his vision and innovation in developing the VeloTrack system. The very project I had built, line by line, formula by formula. My throat tightened. The words of his groundbreaking algorithms felt like a cruel joke. I closed the laptop and leaned back, watching the rain streak across the window. Seattle rain, steady, cold, unbothered. I opened my drawer and took out a small USB drive, the one I never let anyone touch. Inside was the original architecture of the algorithms I'd built over the years. I called it Flight Core, the foundation I wrote on my personal computer long before the company realized its worth. I had never signed a single document transferring ownership. Every file carried its timestamp, device ID, and completion log. Part of me had once believed the company would recognize my effort, that maybe Michael would understand, but after today, I knew better. As I stood up to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door, a 32-year-old woman, tired but somehow clearer than ever, and for the first time in years, I thought a simple, undeniable truth: I don't want to be here another day. That afternoon, I walked home across the Fremont Bridge. The city lay hidden under mist, raindrops cold against my coat. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through unread emails. At the top was one from Elliot at Skyline Freight Systems, checking in. A polite line, a coffee invite I'd declined more than once before. Reading it now felt different, like someone had quietly opened a door I'd been afraid to approach. I didn't reply. I just saved the message, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and kept walking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment felt louder: the rain, distant traffic, the ticking clock. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about that line. Everyone is replaceable. I used to believe it, thinking humility was the key to survival. But now I realized it wasn't humility he wanted, it was control. For the first time in a long time, I felt angry. Not because he insulted me, but because I'd let someone else decide my worth for too long. The next morning, when I powered up my computer, another email appeared. Velocity's internal newsletter announcing the company's new strategy for the coming year, featuring Project VeloTrack 2.0. Not a single mention of me. I stared at the screen, silent, then opened the USB folder. Line after line of code. At the corner of one old script, I noticed a note I'd written years ago, built on trust, not on titles. I smiled, a small, certain smile. The sound of rain tapping on glass filled the room, steady and calm. Maybe it was time to go, before I, too, became part of that cold glass wall. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and whispered to myself, maybe you felt this too, the moment you realize your effort has been reduced to numbers on someone else's spreadsheet. If you know what I mean, tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe in stories about reclaiming your own worth, make sure to subscribe because this journey isn't over yet. I arrived at the office earlier than usual the next morning, not to work, but to observe. The air inside was cold and dry, as sterile as the lines of data I used to build. Everything functioned perfectly, precisely, and without feeling. Michael walked through the workspace without greeting anyone. People just looked up, then lowered their heads and kept typing. I finally understood why Velocity's system was so efficient, because no one dared to make mistakes, no one dared to speak, and no one dared to leave. I turned on my computer, logged into the old database, and downloaded a full copy of VeloTrack's development history. Every line of code, every version carried my digital signature, and I knew I'd backed everything up to my personal repository long ago. When the company first requested integration, I had emailed the legal department asking to sign a copyright transfer, but they replied, not necessary yet. Only now did I realize that answer was the first crack in the wall Michael thought was unbreakable. I called an old friend, Natalie, an attorney specializing in intellectual property. After listening to my story, she stayed quiet for a few seconds, then said, Lauren, if everything you're saying is true and you have documentation, the original code belongs to you, not Velocity. My heartbeat quickened. But they might retaliate hard, she added. Be ready for that. When power is challenged, people don't stay calm. At noon, I ate alone in a small cafe beneath the building. The black coffee cooled in my hand as I opened my laptop. Over the years, I'd built dozens of prototypes, route optimization algorithms, demand forecasting models, versions I never submitted because they felt unfinished. I scrolled through each note, each date, each proof that I'd done the work from home without using company resources. Every line of code was a memory. Long nights, the laptop by the window, streetlight reflections flickering across the screen. I realized that in 10 years, the only thing I truly owned wasn't my job, it was my ideas. That afternoon, I received an email from HR. Subject: Contract update and additional terms. It required all employees to sign a new addendum, including a non-compete clause and expanded intellectual property ownership. Deadline: this week. As I read that line, a chill ran down my spine. They were building a wall, closing the door now that they'd realized I held something they didn't. I printed the contract, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my bag. I already knew I wouldn't sign. Later that evening, I met Natalie at a quiet bar. She placed a thin folder on the table. This is a guide to protecting personal intellectual property, she said. If you decide to leave, make sure everything is backed up, verified, and time-stamped. Keep access to your personal repo and all related evidence. I nodded. She looked at me, her voice softening. Lauren, this isn't just about work. It's about how you let people define your worth. Don't let that happen again. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the glow from the screen casting light across the wall. I opened the old email from Elliot at Skyline Freight Systems. He had once asked to collaborate, saying Skyline was looking for someone to lead their data analytics division. I reread his message. It felt like it had been waiting for me all along. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I didn't reply, not yet. But deep down, I knew my decision was made. I spent the entire night preparing. I backed up all my personal data to an encrypted drive, photographed every notebook page, every dated confirmation, and every unanswered email. By dawn, I gathered everything into a single folder and named it Proof of Origin. I stared at those words on the screen, feeling lighter. Part of me was scared, but another part was strangely calm. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I was rewriting my own story. When the first light of morning slipped through the blinds, I stood up and poured myself a cup of coffee. The city outside was still wet from the night's rain. I knew this would be my last day walking into that building as an employee. But before leaving, I needed to see it one last time, to close the decade of a woman who once believed loyalty was enough. That morning, I arrived at the office at exactly 8. Not early, not late, just another ordinary workday, or at least it looked that way. I stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb slowly. My mind was still, calm as a lake. Inside my jacket pocket, the resignation letter was folded neatly, the words, "Notice of resignation," cutting through the white page like a blade. When the elevator doors opened, I saw Michael walking with his assistant, laughing loudly about something, not even noticing me. I waited until he turned into his office, then followed. "Lauren," he said when he saw me standing at the door. "Something new? Or are we talking about next week's project?" I placed the letter on his desk, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "I'm here to submit my resignation." He looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I'm guessing you're joking. You were just mentioned in the internal report and the new project needs you." "I'm not joking," I said, meeting his eyes. "It's been 10 years, Michael. I've given everything I could. But if my worth here only earns a few laughs, maybe it's time I find somewhere else." He let out a short laugh. "I told you before, everyone's replaceable. Don't make this dramatic." "Maybe," I said, "but not everyone leaves their signature inside every line of code this company runs on." That stopped him. His expression shifted, like he'd just heard something he didn't like. "What are you implying?" "Nothing," I said slowly. "Just stating a fact. I've worked hard, and I never signed any document transferring my intellectual property rights. What's mine, I'll take. The rest, the company can keep." Michael stood up, moved from behind the desk, and walked closer. "Lauren, don't be foolish. You know exactly what happens if you leave. This industry is small. People like you don't get second chances that easily." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I'd rather start over than keep sitting here watching someone else take credit for my work." He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "You think Skyline will give you something Velocity couldn't? They'll use you, then drop you, just like every other company." "I'll take that risk," I said quietly. He turned away, his tone hardening. "Fine. If that's your choice, remember this. We have the best lawyers, and if you walk out with a single byte of company data, you'll regret it." "I'm not taking anything that doesn't belong to me," I said, "but I will take the one thing this company can't hold on to, the ability to create real value." He gave me one last look, eyes filled with anger. I said nothing more. I placed my badge on his desk, turned around, and walked out. As the glass door closed behind me, I heard something crash against his table. The hallway stretched long and bright, the white light glinting off the polished floor. I passed the workstations where I'd spent countless nights, laughing with colleagues, fixing problems no one else saw. A few people looked up, curious, but no one spoke. I nodded to them, then kept walking straight to the elevator. When I stepped outside, Seattle rain had started again. Light, cold, insistent. I held my umbrella but didn't open it right away. I let a few drops hit my face. Each one felt like a reminder. I'm done here. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a notification. An internal email from Velocity. Subject: Update, Data Security and Confidentiality Policy. I opened it, not surprised to see the first line warning that any employee leaving with company data would be considered in legal violation. They were already tightening the walls. I turned the phone off and slipped it into my pocket. There was nothing to fear. I had done everything by the book. Proof Dates, records, every step documented. Still, a strange emptiness lingered inside me. Not fear, just regret. Not for the job, but for the 10 years I had spent believing loyalty could protect me from contempt. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the city fade into mist. I opened my laptop and pulled up the old email from Elliot at Skyline. This time, I didn't hesitate. I typed quickly. Hi, Elliot. I think it's time we talked. I have a few ideas for improving your supply chain that I believe you'll want to hear. I hit send and closed the laptop. Outside, the streetlights reflected off the rain-slick pavement, glowing soft and uncertain. I knew the call would come soon, and when it did, I'd be ready. 3 days after I sent the email, my phone rang while I was standing in line for coffee. Elliot's voice came through, low, steady, with a hint of excitement he didn't bother to hide. Lauren Price? I honestly didn't think you'd reply. I smiled faintly. Neither did I said. But I guess now is the right time. How about we meet today? He asked immediately. No small talk. Skyline headquarters, 15th floor. I want to hear your ideas. I glanced at my watch. 3 o'clock? Perfect. And Lauren? He paused for a second. I've been waiting for this call for 2 years. That afternoon, I arrived at the Skyline building. The atmosphere was nothing like Velocity. Bright, open, people talking with ease instead of tension. Elliot greeted me with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. He looked younger than the magazine photos suggested, with slightly tousled hair, a crooked tie, and the look of someone busy but grounded. We stepped into a small conference room with glass walls overlooking the rain-soaked city. I've read about you, Elliot said, and about that velocity feature on VeloTrack. He tilted his head, half smiling, half sympathetic. A shame your name wasn't in it. I'm used to it, I said quietly. I'm not after fame. I'm after fairness. He nodded. Fairness, I can work with. You mentioned a new system in your email? I opened my laptop and projected the model I called Flight Core, the foundational algorithm I developed to predict logistics demand in real time. It doesn't just optimize routes, I said. It learns from real-world errors. Implemented correctly, it can cut costs by 20% within 3 months. Elliot watched intently, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he asked, You have proof this is your independent invention? Of course. I took a small hard drive from my bag and placed it on the table. Everything's time-stamped, verified, and legally mirrored. I don't need them to acknowledge it. I just need them to be unable to deny it. He paused, then chuckled softly. I like how you talk. All right, then. Skyline's been looking for someone to lead our algorithm division. I want you to run it. Triple your previous salary, stock options, and full ownership of your inventions. But most importantly, your name goes on the product. I kept my face composed even as my heart raced. I want everything in writing, I said, including full technical autonomy and transparent IP acquisition processes. You'll have it all, he said, extending his hand. Welcome to Skyline. I shook his hand. The feeling was strange, light and final all at once. Something had just been cut clean, and I didn't regret it. During my first week at Skyline, I worked with a small team of 5, young, agile, smart, most of them former engineers from other West Coast tech firms. They called me the new brain, half joking, half serious. I began rebuilding the system from scratch and renamed it AeroLink. The name meant connection, something Velocity never understood. Elliot gave me full freedom. His only request was simple. I don't need you to prove you're right. I need results that can't be replicated. We worked nonstop for 6 weeks. The energy came back to me like a tide I thought was long gone. Every time the team ran a successful simulation, excitement filled the room. The same kind I felt 10 years ago when I built my first working algorithm. No one stole credit. Every contribution was acknowledged. For the first time, I didn't just belong to a system, I was shaping it. One late evening, as the team reviewed data, a young engineer named Ryan pointed at the screen. Lauren, Velocity just posted something on LinkedIn. They're announcing VeloTrack 2.0, the most advanced optimization yet. I leaned closer. The headline sat above a photo of Michael, standing in front of the company logo with that same confident smile. The description boasted that Velocity continued to lead the industry with strictly protected proprietary technology. Ryan sighed. Guess they're trying to send a message. Let them talk, I said, closing the screen. We don't need to explain anything. The results will speak for us. A month later, AeroLink entered its first live trial. The system predicted port congestion and delivery times down to the hour, cutting average costs by 28%. The results sent Skyline's business division into overdrive. Elliot called me up to his office, tossing a report onto the desk. You just made the board want to roll this out nationwide. I stared at the numbers, proud but uneasy. Michael won't stay quiet, I said. Elliot smiled. I hope not. That means he's scared. That night, I left the office late. Rain fell again, steady and rhythmic against the glass, like distant drums. I stood under the building's awning, staring across the street where Velocity's logo still glowed through the night. I knew they were watching me, probably already digging for information. But I also knew this time the game was different. This time, I wasn't the one on defense. When I got home, my phone buzzed. A new notification. A podcast update. Corporate Truths. New episode. The Betrayal of Innovation. A former Velocity insider speaks out. I stared at the title, a tight ache forming in my chest. I didn't need to open it to know who was behind it. Michael had just made his first move. I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the phone screen showing the title of the new podcast episode. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity won. I pressed play. The host's voice came through, calm and low, like someone narrating a true crime story. Today we're discussing the controversy between two of Seattle's leading logistics companies, Velocity Dynamics and Skyline Freight. An internal source claims that a former senior employee at Velocity carried proprietary technology to a competitor. Joining us is someone who worked directly with her. The next voice made my stomach tighten. It was Alice, my former colleague, who had sat across from me for 3 years. Lauren was brilliant, she said, but she knew how to use it to her advantage. I'm not saying she stole anything, but everyone knows Velotrack was a team effort. She just liked being the only name remembered. I stopped the playback right there. I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew exactly who was behind it. Michael wasn't just striking back. He was trying to destroy my reputation before the truth could surface. The next morning, Skyline's communications floor buzzed with tension. Several tech outlets had already picked up the podcast, spinning it further. Genius engineer or corporate thief? When I walked in, the room went silent. Elliot caught my eye through the conference room glass and motioned me inside. He tossed a stack of papers onto the table, a printout of the article. We're handling this, he said, but I want to hear from you first. You want to know if I took their data? I asked, my voice rough from a sleepless night. I'm not asking because I doubt you, Elliot said. I'm asking because I need to know how to respond. We can stay quiet or fight back, but I don't want to be wrong. I didn't take any company data, I said. Only what I created myself. I have all the evidence and timestamps. Good, he said. I'll have legal start building the case. But Lauren, they're testing you. They want to see if you'll lose control. If you do, they win. I clenched my fists, swallowing the anger rising in my chest. I'm not losing control, but I'm not staying silent either. That afternoon, I agreed to a long interview with Tech Perspectives. The interviewer, a middle-aged woman named Harper, looked at me over her round glasses. You know you're standing in the middle of a storm, right? I know, I said. But if someone accused you of stealing your own creation, what would you do? I'm not here to retaliate. I just want to tell the truth. Aren't you afraid speaking out will make the fire worse? She asked. I used to be, I said, but fear never saved anyone. I've been silent long enough. The article came out 2 days later, titled, Lauren Price. I didn't take data, I took back the value they never recognized. It spread quickly. Some called it bravery. Others said I was playing the victim. I didn't read most of the comments. Every night, I just sat by the window watching the rain fall, but I knew I couldn't stop halfway. I had to see this through. A week later, Michael struck again. Velocity released a press statement accusing Skyline of deliberate misappropriation of company-owned intellectual property. Attached were screenshots of code fragments showing similarities to Aerolink's system, inevitable since I had written the foundation for both. The story spread across every major tech outlet. Elliot called an emergency meeting. They just filed a motion in district court, he said. They're requesting an injunction to halt Aerolink until the dispute is settled. I stared at the paper in his hand, a chill creeping through me. If that injunction is granted, we'd have to shut the system down immediately? Yes, up to 30 days, and our biggest partner will suspend the contract. The room fell silent. Outside, the team kept running simulations, unaware that their work might be frozen at any moment. I looked at Elliot. What do you need me to do? Stay calm and trust me, he said. We'll fight this legally. But if you have anything that can help, start gathering it. As he spoke, a memory hit me. Those old emails between me and Velocity's legal department, the ones they never answered, where I'd formally requested an IP transfer agreement. I still had them. Dated, time-stamped, digitally verified. Maybe it wouldn't be enough to win outright, but it was something they couldn't erase. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and clicked into the folder labeled Proof of Origin. One by one, the files appeared, silent witnesses to years of work. Each annotation, each note, each timestamp was part of my defense. Outside, the rain turned heavier, beating against the glass. Somewhere across the city, Michael was probably awake too, preparing for the court battle he believed would end me. But what he didn't know was that this time, I was more ready than ever. The hearing took place on a gray Monday morning, Seattle wrapped in fog. I sat in the county courthouse waiting room beside Natalie, my old friend and now my attorney. She flipped through a thick binder, pausing every so often to glance at me. You holding up? She asked quietly. I don't know, I admitted. It feels like I'm about to prove to the whole world that I'm not a thief. Natalie smiled, not to comfort, but to ground me. You don't need to prove it to the whole world. Just prove it with data. And no one does that better than you. The courtroom was small, with pale walls under dim lights. Across from me sat Michael, flanked by two Velocity lawyers. He looked nothing like the polished man the press adored, his face stiff, his hair combed too neatly. When our eyes met, he smiled faintly, as if this were still a game he was sure he'd win. The judge began reading the case summary. Velocity accused me and Skyline of using proprietary algorithms and source code developed during my employment. They requested an injunction to suspend Aerolink's operations pending investigation. Natalie stood, her tone calm and precise. Your Honor, the code in question was independently created by Ms. Price during personal time, on personal equipment, with no use of company resources. We have timestamps, development logs, and emails proving Velocity never held ownership of these algorithms. One of Velocity's attorneys rose, voice clipped and cold. But, Your Honor, while employed at Velocity, Ms. Price used these same systems within our projects. Even if developed off the clock, they provided direct benefit to the company. Therefore, they belong to Velocity. Michael leaned back, eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. Natalie didn't flinch. The original employment contract clearly states that intellectual property applies only to products created using company resources during working hours. We have that contract here, Your Honor. She lifted the file. And we also have emails showing Velocity declined to sign an IP transfer agreement despite Ms. Price's formal request. The judge reviewed the documents, nodding. The evidence will be entered into the record. However, due to partial code overlap between the systems, the court will require additional review. In the meantime, Aerolink's commercial deployment will be temporarily suspended for 30 days. Each word landed like ice water. Skyline would have to halt all testing, and pending contracts would freeze. Michael glanced at me, his eyes filled with quiet satisfaction. On the way back, I said nothing. Elliot met me in the Skyline lobby, worry etched into his face. 30 days, he said softly. We wait for the next hearing. Wait? I looked at him, struggling to keep my composure. They just want a round, Elliot. If I stay silent, they'll think I agree. Sometimes taking a step back is a strategy, not surrender, he said. I didn't reply. He was right, but that didn't make the helplessness any easier. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I went through every file, Every email, every log I'd ever archived. Everything was perfect, yet something felt missing until I stumbled on an old folder in my external drive. It contained emails between Michael and me from 3 years ago. I opened one. The subject line read, Formal Proposal, IP Acquisition. In it, I formally offered Velocity the chance to purchase the Flight Core algorithm, outlining a compensation structure. Below it was Michael's reply. No need to overcomplicate things. Just deploy it if it works. We'll deal with the rest later. My heart pounded as I read it again and again. This was the key. His words proved he knew I owned the technology and had chosen to ignore protocol. I immediately sent a copy to Natalie. The next morning she called, her voice bright with rare excitement. Lauren, this is it. That email proves Velocity knew you owned the IP and still used it. If the court accepts it, the injunction will be overturned. I looked out the window where sunlight finally broke through the gray clouds. 30 days might test us, but now I had something they couldn't deny. While Skyline paused commercial work, we didn't stop moving. I spent those days refining the system, optimizing the algorithms, and rewriting documentation. Elliot was always nearby, bringing coffee, sharing quiet updates from legal. On the 28th day, Natalie called. The court is reopening the hearing, she said. I arrived early, sitting in the empty hallway, clutching the drive that held the email. When the session began, Natalie presented the new evidence. Michael lowered his head to read, and his face paled. The judge read the message aloud. Mr. Trent, she said, it's clear from this response that you declined to formalize a transfer agreement. Do you deny this is your email? Michael said nothing. The silence filled the room. The judge nodded. The court acknowledges this new evidence. The injunction against Skyline is hereby lifted. A full trial will be scheduled within 60 days. Until then, AeroLink is permitted to operate. I exhaled slowly. Around me, the Skyline team erupted in quiet cheers, but I stayed seated, watching Michael. He wasn't smiling anymore. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear. The kind he used to think only weaker people felt. Outside the courthouse, Natalie squeezed my hand. You just won the most important round. I smiled, but it wasn't joy. I knew this wasn't over. Michael wouldn't stop. The fight would go on. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. I'd finally reclaimed the right to tell my own story. After the second hearing, Skyline came back to life. News of the court overturning the injunction spread fast across the tech world, and the headlines shifted tone. I was no longer the traitor, but the woman who challenged the old system. The engineering team returned to work that same night, the office filled with the clatter of keyboards, bursts of laughter, and the sound of air finally rushing back into lungs that had held their breath for weeks. Elliot walked past the workstations and stopped beside my desk. Thanks for not giving up, he said quietly. If you hadn't held your ground, Skyline might not be here. I smiled. Thanks for believing in me. But I knew the celebration wouldn't last. Michael wasn't the kind to lose quietly. And just as I expected, a week later, Velocity's financial report went public. Stocks down nearly 40% in a single quarter. Their two biggest clients, Interport and Northbridge, announced a temporary suspension of contracts over system reliability concerns. Investors started pulling out. Rumors spread like oil on water. On Monday morning, Elliot called me into the conference room. He was holding a newspaper with a headline that read, Velocity Dynamics on the verge of collapse. He set it on the table, his expression a mix of satisfaction and caution. You were right, he said. They're in free fall. I looked at the page for a long moment. I don't want them to collapse, I said softly. I just wanted fairness. Elliot tilted his head. Fairness doesn't always look the way we want it to. That afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was hoarse, tired, but familiar. Lauren, it's me, Michael. I paused for a few seconds. What do you want? I just want to talk. We have nothing left to say. Please, he said, his tone dropping, almost pleading. Just once, not to negotiate, just to talk, face to face. I hesitated, then agreed. Partly out of curiosity, partly because I wanted to look him in the eye. the man who once made me doubt my own worth. We met at a quiet cafe near Lake Union. Michael arrived late, dressed in a dark coat, thinner than I remembered. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around a coffee he hadn't touched. "I guess you've seen the news," he said. "Velocity's in deep trouble. I read the reports." He gave a dry laugh. "You won. You got everything you wanted: recognition, vindication, the crowd's applause." I met his gaze. "I didn't do this for applause. I just did what you told me. If you think you're worth more, find somewhere that sees it." So I did. He fell silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. I used to admire you, your persistence, your insight, the way you saw what others missed. But you believe too much in justice. You think truth can fix things. In this world, truth only matters when it serves power. Maybe, I said evenly. But you forgot one thing: power can change hands. Truth doesn't. He laughed, a broken sound. "You sound like I did when I started, but you'll see. Sooner or later, they'll try to bring you down, just like they did me." Maybe. But if I have to choose between falling because I was honest or surviving because I lied, I know which one I'll take. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the rain began again, a thin veil over the lake. Michael's voice turned quieter, almost like a confession. "The board's pushing me out. They want my resignation. Maybe I deserve it. But hundreds of people will lose their jobs, Lauren. Have you thought about that?" I looked up at him. "I think about them every day. But you're the one who put them in this position. I just pulled the curtain back so everyone could see what was behind it." He nodded, eyes hollow. "Maybe you're right. Either way, congratulations." He stood, leaving his untouched coffee behind. As he walked out, his reflection lingered in the glass. A man who once believed he couldn't be replaced, now just a shadow of himself. 3 weeks later, the news broke. Michael Trent resigned as CEO for personal reasons. Velocity laid off more than 200 employees. Stocks fell another 20%. Industry forums called it one of the fastest collapses in logistics tech history. Elliot handed me the article, half teasing, half thoughtful. "You just did what every competitor in the industry tried and failed to do." "Not me," I said. "He destroyed himself." But the victory didn't taste like I thought it would. Every time I saw headlines about layoffs, my chest tightened. I remembered the faces I used to work beside, the ones who'd simply believed they were building something good. Now they were just numbers in a quarterly loss report. One evening, I sat in the office looking out at the city lights. Elliot came in holding 2 cups of coffee. He said, "Skyline just landed 3 new contracts, all former Velocity clients." I smiled faintly. "Sounds fair." He sat next to me, quiet for a moment. "But is it fair," he asked, "that we benefit from their fall?" I didn't answer. My thoughts went to Michael, to the laid-off employees, to the system I once helped build. Part of me wanted to feel satisfied. The other part just felt empty. Elliot looked at me again, his voice softer. "You did the right thing, Lauren. But maybe now it's time to think about what comes after you've won." I nodded, though I already knew the truth. Winning, sometimes, is just another kind of loss. And Elliot's question would stay with me long after that night, until I found a way to turn the aftermath into something that finally meant more than revenge. I spent many nights thinking about what Elliot had said. "Now's the time to decide what you'll do after you've won." Won. Such a strong word. But what I felt inside was anything but strength. The more the headlines praised the woman who brought down an empire, the colder I felt. There was no pride, only quiet, heavy stillness. One night, I received a message from an unknown number. "Lauren, this is Kara. I used to work in Velocity's operations team. They cut the entire department last week. I heard you're at Skyline. Can you help me find something?" The message had no question mark, as if she were too tired to hope. I stared at the words for a long time. Then another message came. From Jake R., logistics analyst, laid off from Velocity. Then another, and another. None of them is angry, none bitter. Just one simple line. Is Skyline hiring? That was when I realized these weren't numbers in a layoff report. They were the people who used to greet me every morning, who stayed late helping me debug code when the system failed. Now they were jobless because someone decided they were acceptable losses. The next day, I brought it up to Elliot. He sat in silence for a while, then asked, "You think Skyline could absorb all of them?" "I don't know," I said, "but maybe we should try, not just to help them, but to prove we can do things differently." He leaned back in his chair, quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about a rehiring program? I'm talking about responsibility." Velocity collapsed because it forgot that people are the real assets. We're not making that mistake. 3 weeks later, Skyline announced Second Flight, a rehiring and retraining initiative for former Velocity employees. We didn't just fast track applications, we partnered with 3 training organizations to help them update their technical skills. Elliot put me in charge of the entire program. At first, the response was skeptical. Many thought it was just a PR move to polish Skyline's image after the lawsuit. But when applications started pouring in, when the first thank you emails arrived, the atmosphere in the office changed. Even the employees who had once doubted me began volunteering to mentor, to recommend, to help. I'll never forget the first interview. A woman in her 50s, hair streaked with gray, sat across from me, clutching her folder. "My name's Marlene," she said. "I worked at Velocity for 15 years. I didn't think I'd ever be sitting here again after all that time." I recognized her instantly. Marlene, the former head of customer service, the one who always brought pastries during holidays. Before I could speak, she went on. "I didn't come here to ask for a job. I just wanted to see if you think it was worth it. Worth putting so many people like us out of work so that justice could be called fair." I stayed silent. Her question hit like a knife to the chest. Finally, I said softly, "I can't change what happened, but I can change what comes next. If you're willing, I'd like you to lead our customer service training program. Not as compensation, just as a beginning." Marlene looked at me, eyes glistening. "You think I can still do it?" "I don't think," I said. "I believe." She nodded. And for the first time in months, I saw hope in the eyes of someone who once worked at Velocity. Within 3 months, Second Flight had helped nearly 100 people find new jobs, over 60 of them at Skyline. Business magazines started calling it a new model of humanity in logistics tech. But what made me proud wasn't the headlines. It was how the Skyline team talked about the project. They didn't call it a campaign, they called it a chance to do what's right. One morning, as I walked into the office, Marlene was waiting in the hallway. "You know," she said, "I just got an email from Jason. He's from operations. He wants to apply too." I smiled. The more, the better. This door isn't closing for anyone. That afternoon, Elliot stopped by my desk and dropped a newspaper in front of me. On the front page was a photo of the Skyline building under the headline, "Second Flight. When Justice Becomes More Than Victory." He smiled. "You just did what Michael never understood, turned power into something human." I looked out the window at the thin Seattle sunlight. "No," I said. "I'm just learning how to take responsibility for what I've built, for the light and the shadows alike." That night, I stayed late. In the quiet of my office, I opened the project dashboard. 173 people rehired, 39 in retraining, nearly 200 more under review. I stared at those numbers and felt the weight in my chest ease, just a little. But beneath that calm, one thought lingered: Michael. The man who once made me question my worth had vanished from the news. No one knew where he'd gone, and somehow, I knew this wasn't the end. One crisp autumn morning, more than 6 months after the Second Flight program began, I found an unmarked envelope on my desk. No return address, just a single handwritten line. "Thank you for helping me understand." Inside was a clipped article from the Wall Street Journal: "The Rise of Skyline Freight and the Collapse of Velocity Dynamics. Lessons from Leadership." Beneath it lay a folded note in handwriting I knew by heart. "You once said power can change hands, but truth never does. You were right, Michael." I sat there for a long time, caught between something sharp and something soft. He was still watching, even in silence. I didn't know if it was regret or closure, but I knew this much. The story between us had finally reached its end. That afternoon, I left the office early. Seattle smelled of rain. The streets were crowded, but inside I felt strangely calm. I walked along Lake Union, past the cafe where I'd last seen Michael, and stopped by the railing. The water reflected the pale sky, perfectly still, as if it had forgotten every storm it ever knew. I thought about my 10 years at Velocity, the girl who once sat in a glass room, trembling under the sound of her boss's laughter. The girl who left with nothing but a small USB drive and a quiet sense of defiance, unaware that her choice would shake an empire. If not for that day, maybe I'd still be there, convincing myself that loyalty was enough to be seen. Now, Skyline had become a symbol of something new. AeroLink was patented, carrying my name and my team's. In the main lobby hung a plaque engraved, "Innovation starts with those who refuse to be replaced." Every time I walked past, I stopped for a moment, as if to thank the woman I used to be for not giving up. A year later, I was invited to speak at the Innovation Awards. The hall was packed, lights bouncing off hundreds of faces, some of them old colleagues from Velocity, now standing beside me at Skyline. When I took the stage, I didn't talk about algorithms or revenue. I told a story. I used to think revenge meant making someone fall, but real revenge is when you rise, stronger, wiser, refusing to let pain turn you into what broke you. Justice doesn't always come from the courtroom. Sometimes it begins the moment you believe you deserve better than the way they treated you. The room was quiet for a few seconds before applause filled the air, long and warm. I didn't cry. I only smiled. Because I finally understood, victory isn't about who loses, it's about who you become after everything. That night, as I left the hall, I saw Marlene waiting in the lobby. She smiled as she walked toward me. "I once asked if it was worth it," she said. "Now I have my answer." "Do you think it was?" I asked. "Not just worth it," she said. "Necessary." She squeezed my hand before walking away. I stood by the window, watching the Seattle lights shimmer over the water. It felt complete. No victory is perfect, but some bring you back to yourself, and that's what matters most. I stepped out into the cool night with nothing but peace. No anger, no resentment, just gratitude for the journey, the loss, and the person I had become. If someone asked me what I learned, I'd say this: no one gets to decide your worth but you. And sometimes leaving isn't an ending, it's the beginning of the life you truly deserve. Which moment in this story moved you the most? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story, where justice is served in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for listening.